This is episode 3 of the real-life web testing with OpenTest series. Just a quick recap of where we left things in the last episode. We have a test repo with 3 files. We have a locators.yaml data file, which contains the locators for the UI elements we're working with in our tests. We have a macro file called login.yaml that performs, as the name says, the actions necessary for logging into the Todoist application. And then we have a test file that is now very simple. All it does is just calls the login macro. So we want to make a bit more progress with this test repo. And the first thing I want to do is I want to improve things a little bit as far as the login macro is concerned, because one very important thing during the login is, of course, the username and the password that we are using for the login. But right now, the username and the password are hard-coded into the login macro. So if we look at the end of the macro, the username and the password that we're entering in there are hard-coded, right? This is not a best practice, of course, because we might want to run some tests that switch between two users, or who knows what we want to do. Hard-coding this information is for sure not the best way forward. So what do we do about this? One thing that OpenTest allows us to do is to input information into a macro using a feature called macro arguments. So when we call the macro in this test here, we can pass arguments just like we pass arguments for any regular test action. So these arguments, we can call them whatever we like. Let's call them username and password. And the values that we will use for the username and password are the ones that we are now hard coding in this login macro. So this is the username and this is the password. All right, so now let's save the test. And in the macro here, I want to now read the arguments that were used by the test that called my macro. The syntax to do that is $macro args, and then you put a dot and the name of the argument that you want to read. In our case, we want to read the argument username. And we use the same syntax for the password. But of course, we read a different argument. We read the password argument and we save. And if you forget this syntax, you can always find it on the in the documentation. So if I go to docs, it takes me to the getopentest.org website. And in the reference here, in the JavaScript API, you can find the complete JavaScript API, but what we're interested in is the macro args object. And this object, as the documentation says, exposes all of the arguments that were passed to a macro test action. And we have a very simple example here of how it is used. All right, so let me go back in here. So let's run the test and confirm that it still works. So let's name this session, let's name it Todoist smoke tests, and this is the only test we have so far. Let's run it. Let's see what's going on. The browser started. It logs in. yeah, so it inputted the username and the password correctly, which means everything still works as expected. This looks much better now, but there is still something that bothers me. We are entering the username, we are hard coding basically the username and the password into the test, but we will have a lot of tests that will need the username and password. So this is a bad practice, because when the username or password changes, we'll have to go and change all of those tests. The best way to solve this problem is to read the username and password from a data file. So let's create a new data file in here. Let's call it config.yaml. And in this data file, we'll have, actually, let's just copy those two things from here. Username and password. Let's indent them properly. Let's save. So this data file only contains these two properties. And then in here, instead of hard coding them, let's read them from the data file config. And this is going to be the username property. And then the other one is going to be the password property. This is much better now. Good. Let's do the next exciting thing, which is to implement a meaningful test. This only does the login. So our test will go to this page, which is basically the first page we see after the login. And we want to go into the today section. We want to click on add task. We want to add a new task here. Click the add task button. And after that, we want to right click this task and we want to delete the task like that, to leave the application in the same state that we found it. So let's begin to add the steps for those things. I think the first thing I want to do is I want to see, instead of the next 7 days view, I want to see the today view. So I think I want to click on the today first, because I'm not exactly sure what this next 7 days view will show at a given time. I'm not familiar with this application at all, which is, by the way, something you don't want to do. Whenever you implement a test suite for an application, you want to first make sure that you familiarize yourself with the application and you know it inside out, because that is the only way to implement meaningful tests in the proper way. And I don't want to go into details now, but believe me when I say that it's really important for you to understand the application thoroughly. So it might be useful for you to do some manual testing first before you go into automated testing for that particular application. So we want to click on today. So let's do the inspect thing to view to figure out the locators. And I want to display this on the bottom, the DevTools. So let's go to today and let's see what can we use to identify it. So it's a span element with the text today. Okay, that's good, but this might be a bit too generic. Maybe this is also a span element with the text today, right? So we want to make sure we select the one we care about. Is there something more specific here? Okay, see, this is what we're looking for, an ID. So we are looking for this today element inside of this unordered list. Good. So after the login macro, we want to add something else. So we want to add a click. I don't want to start writing it from scratch. So let's go to the reference, to the Selenium keywords, to the click action, and let's copy this into here, indent properly, and then let's put the description. Click the today sidebar menu. So the click action is what we want. That's good. So then we'll select our element by CSS, and we'll say we want to click the element with ID top filters. So ID top filters. I always like to copy and paste to avoid making mistakes. And see, because it contains a hash mark, and the hash mark means a comment in YAML, I have to put this string into double quotes. And inside of the top filters element, I'm looking for a span with the text today. And actually, I don't know how to do, yeah, because I'm looking into the content of the element. I don't think it's possible to do it by CSS. So let's do this by XPath. So from the root of the document, we go however many elements we need, and then we are looking for any element. Well, actually, it's a unordered list, so yeah, let's make it an unordered list with the ID attribute equals to top filters, and after that we go however many elements we need farther down the hierarchy, and we are looking for a span element with the text today. Span element with the text today. And actually, let's test this selector in the browser before we use it. And the way we do that is by using the $x function that Chrome provides for us to test XPath selectors. Okay, so see, this function returned only one element, which is what we expect. If I expand this, if I hover over this first element here, see, it hovers over my element in the browser, which is nice. So my selector is working fine. By the way, if you want to test CSS selectors, you can do the same, only with the function $. And in here you can pass any element. Oh, there's no paragraphs in this page. That's interesting. So let's look for a span element tag. See, it returns all the span tags that are that it found in this page. Good. So yeah, so remember $, and $x to test your XPath selectors or CSS selectors in the Chrome browser. So we clicked on today, and then we want to click on add task. So let's see what is the selector for add task. So this this is an A tag. Is there anything interesting in here? Not really. An A tag into the agenda add task list. Okay, I guess that works. So let's test this. So we test the CSS selector, and the CSS selector is in a list of class agenda add task. We are looking for an A element, and we get only one element. Okay, so this is our selector, our CSS selector. So let's put it here, and we'll copy and paste this action. And we will use a CSS selector that looks like this. Okay, so after we click on the add task link, we want to start entering the task subject. So we want to enter it in this element. So let's see what this element is. It's a div with the class rich text editor, and that's not going to be enough probably to identify it, and we can try in the console. A div, oh sorry, $. We are looking for a div with the class rich text editor, and sure, we got only one element, but just to be safe, I would still add a bit more information to this selector. So let's see if we have something that we can use. See, we have this unordered list with the class UL today. So I think I will do this. I will add to this selector that it has to be found in the class in an unordered list with the class UL today. So now I'm a bit more satisfied with the specificity of this selector. So the action that I want to use now, I don't want to click on the item anymore. I want to send some keys to this item. So let's look for the send keys documentation and copy the sample code. Let's indent properly, and the description of this action is type task subject. Yeah, I think that's enough. We want to do send keys. The locator, we're going to identify this element by CSS, and the CSS is this one. The text I want to enter is my first to do item. All right, I don't want to send enter, because what I want to do is, well, let's copy and paste this text. I want to click on add task, on the add task button. So let's see the selector for this button. So it's an A tag, IST button, button red, submit button. Okay, submit button looks promising, but I need to be more specific. So maybe let's go even farther than this table. Let's see if there's any other parent that we can use. Yeah, okay, let's use submit area because we don't want to waste too much time on this. But just remember, when you build selectors, make sure that they are specific enough for what you need. So we will go into a table with the class td submit area. So table with the class submit area, and there's only one of them. That's good. And in here we'll look for an A with the class submit button. An A with the class submit underscore btn. Good. This is a nice selector, so let's copy it. Let's put it, well, we need another click action. So let's copy this one. And let's use this CSS selector. Save. And let's execute what we have so far. So remember, our actor is now configured to, so if I go into the actor YAML file, I can see that my actor is now configured to reuse the WebDriver instance. So this window you see here is controlled by the WebDriver that is instantiated in the actor that I'm running. So whenever I execute a test, it will reuse this window. So let's put this window into the state that we need. Let's cancel this. We go to today, so we are in the today view, and let me close the configuration file for the actor. So in the test, I don't want to do the login anymore because I'm already logged in. I want to comment it out and perform the rest of the actions. And actually, we are clicking on the today sidebar menu first. So just for fun, let's click on this other menu just to confirm that it indeed clicks on today and does everything correctly. And let's save this test and let's run it. So duplicate this test session. Let's go into the browser now and wait and see what it does. Clicks on today, enters the text, and then he clicks on the add task button. That's perfect. Good, so now that we entered the task, one thing that would be nice to do would be to also clean up after us, because we ideally want to leave the application in the same place that we found it. So what we want to do is right click on the task. We want to do delete task, then click on this delete button. So now we're good, right? So let me cancel this. Let me run the test again just to input that, to add that task. And now let's continue the test with the right click on the task. Now to right click on an element, you have to use a special procedure. If we go into the documentation and we go to the top of the Selenium keywords page, in here we have this section called Advanced User Gestures Keywords. These advanced user gestures will allow you to perform, like the name says, some advanced gestures that wouldn't otherwise be possible with just the regular actions. For example, if you want to do a control click, let me actually click on this. So this is a very simple example of how you would perform a control click. So you have multiple actions, like multiple keywords, let's call them, just to not confuse people. Multiple keywords called actions key down, actions click, actions key up, and so on and so forth. These keywords will not perform any work at the time when you call them, but only when the test actor encounters the actions perform keyword. Only then all the actions keywords that you used will be performed one by one, as you would expect. And this way you can do, as you can see here, you can do something that wouldn't be possible, right? You put the control, you press basically the control key in here, then you perform a click while the control key is kept pressed, then you perform a key up on the control key, and then you give the actor the green light to perform all of these tasks. So we'll talk maybe in more detail about the advanced user keywords in another episode. For the time being, what I want you to remember is that in order to perform a right click with Selenium, you need an action called actions context click. So let's copy and paste this action at the end here. And we put the description as right-click the task subject, and we do an actions context click on our task. Now, how do we identify this task? So let's right-click doesn't work. All right, let me click on this, then click the task. All right, so this is a span element that has the text my first to do item. This is a special case because our locator will be dynamic, right? So the way to identify that element, let me test in the console here, would be to look for an element that has the text equal to whatever text we have here. And we got our task. I'm not entirely happy with this XPath because depending on what this text is, we might inadvertently select something else on the page. So let's put a bit more specificity into it before we do anything else. Okay, so let's look for that span element in the unordered list with the class UL today. So we are going to we are going to look for this element in a UL that has its class attribute, whose class attribute contains UL today. Good, it works. Perfect. It's a bit uglier, but at least we are fairly sure that we're not going to select something we don't want. So let's copy this and let's put it in here in the actions context click. So we are going to use XPath, and we need double quotes because we have some square brackets in there. And okay, so we have a selector here which will work for now. So after we do the context click, in order for this action to actually execute, we need to put actions perform. So we need to put another action. I won't put a description for this one because it doesn't really do anything. It just triggers the action that we already put a description for. So we do an actions perform. This will perform our right click, and after that we need to do a click on delete task. So this one, okay, this is a nice way to identify it. It's a TD whose data track attribute is task more delete. So let's try this. Data dash track. Okay, so let's try to use CSS. So it's a TD whose data track attribute is equal to task more delete. Okay, and apparently we have two elements that are selected when we use this selector. The first one is not visible. The second one is the one we want. Okay, so CSS will not work here. We will have to use XPath. So let's test because we have to select the second element, and I'm not sure. I mean, I know it's possible to do with CSS, but I don't want to look for it right now, so let's just use XPath. And we are looking for a TD element whose data track attribute is equal to tasks more delete. Okay, we get 2 elements, and now we want to select the second one, so we put everything in parentheses like this, and then we use the subscript and we say 2. So now hopefully we got the one we were looking for. Good. So this is our selector. Let me copy it and put it in here. So let's copy and paste this test action. Let's add it here, and then this selector is XPath, so we'll say XPath, and we'll have to use double quotes because we have square brackets, right? And this looks good. So after we click on delete task, we want to click on this delete button. So let's inspect it. I don't see anything very specific here, so we're looking for a span. Okay, so let's look for a span element with the text delete, I guess. I usually like to avoid using the text, but in this case I think it might be okay. And we want to be specific, so let's also look into a div with the class alert holder. Okay, so we'll also use XPath for this one because we are looking for the text inside of the element. So we go to console and we build the selector. So it's going to be XPath. We're looking for a div with the class that contains alert holder. So let's see if this works fine. And then inside of this we are looking for a span element whose text contains or is delete. Perfect. So let's go here, let's copy some click action, and then the selector is going to be XPath, and the XPath is going to be what we just built in here. We save and let's run this, but let's see. So this starts with adding the action and doing everything good. So let's put the application, let's click delete. Now our application is in the state that we need it. And let's run the test from this window. Create session, test started. Let's go and see what it does. Adds the task, it right clicks and it deletes it. Perfect, perfect. Good. So now we basically have a working test. Of course, this is not a login test anymore. This does something else. So let's give the proper description here. Add task to the today section. Let's save this. And then in the name of the test, we have to do the same. And let's call this test add task to today section. I guess that's fine. Here's one other thing that I would like to do. See, this test doesn't look too bad, but it could look much nicer. If you think about it, what we're doing here is we are adding a task. I think it's up to here, and then we are deleting the task. And this is the section which deletes the task. Let's make this test look much nicer than it does right now by creating a macro that adds a task and then another macro that deletes a task. When we do this, this test will really look beautiful, and it's going to be really easy to reuse those macros in subsequent tests. I'm sure that we will need the ability to add tasks and delete tasks in many tests. So let's create another macro in here called add task. And let's use a capital T. I mean, the convention for the macro name is Pascal case, which means don't use any spaces to separate words or any other character to separate the words, but use a capital letter at the beginning of every word. Of course, if you have another preferred naming convention, you can use that, but I would advise that you go with this convention for reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. So this is going to be the macro. Let's copy the test into the macro, and then the syntax for the macros is you don't need the actors property, you just need a list of actions that you want to perform, like this. And we'll have to indent this. Okay, remove all of the indenting. And of course, this macro will be the add task macro, which means we don't need to log in, and we only need to perform the test actions to add the task up to see, this description is not correct. This thing clicks on the add task button. We have to be careful and put the correct descriptions into our actions, because this will make our test much more readable and will allow non-technical persons to understand what's going on. And we have to remove everything from here onwards, because this is the deletion of the task. We save this, and now in our test, instead of all this, we can just do macro add task and save. And let's add another macro called delete task, and let's do the same. Let's copy this test in here. Let's indent everything properly and delete those things from here, and then we just leave the test actions that delete the task. And in the test, we now, instead of all of these test actions, we can just use macro delete task. This looks much better. So let's test things now and see that everything still works. Let's verify our browser window and let's start a new test. Oh, I have to select the test again. I did duplicate session, but the name of our test changed, so now I don't have any more tests selected, so I have to select it again. And let's say create session. The test started, and if we look here, everything still works as it used to. We can now uncomment this, save, and we can test our test from the very beginning. So let's do logout, and let's duplicate the session. Everything works. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I'll see you in episode 4.